I don't usually do this, and I don't usually hear electric guitar in this space. Before I introduce myself, can we just take a moment to appreciate the beauty of this day? We are blessed to the point of being spoiled to live where we get to live. And then the beauty of the people in this room, the beauty of the choir, and then the beauty of this room itself, this sacred space. I want to point out just a couple beautiful things in here. Behind me, above the altar and in between the pipes, there's the south rose window. And that stained glass depicts the life and character of Jesus. And on these transom windows here, above these doors, we have the Holy Spirit represented by a dove, and the act of communion represented by the cup and the bread. And down these two halls, we have the representations of the 12 disciples. Judas didn't make the cut, but Matthias did. He replaced Judas. But I want you guys to take a look and see if you can hazard a guess as to which one represents Simon Peter. We've been talking about Simon Peter the last few weeks in our sermon series. I'll tell you later which one it is. Remind me if I forget. My wife and two daughters and I have been at Torrey Pines Church for 18 years. My girls were 2 and 4 when we first started coming here, and my family and myself have been blessed beyond measure to be part of this church. The first person we ever met when we came on campus here was Joanne Beck. And if you know Joanne, she took us by the hands, literally, and gave us a guided tour of the property and the original chapel. And then we met the Mozaikas. And the Mozaikas, 18 years ago, threw us our 10-year wedding anniversary party. And then we met Chuck and Bev Workman, and they were mentors of ours. And Chuck and Bev, they paid for my first semester at seminary. I think Chuck said, "I think you need a little more Jesus in your life." But it was kind of like a drug dealer where the first one was free, and then the rest of them cost me about $40,000. We met Bob Bishop, who I helped lead the surf ministry here at Torrey Pines with him. And Bob was on the board at Torrey Pines here when the bricks were laid. When the cornerstone out front that says 1984, he was on the board when this was built. He told me he set some of the bricks, but I don't believe him. Bob's golfing today, so he's not here, so pray for his salvation. And we met Ken. Pastor Ken was a young man 18 years ago. He was 75. And Pastor Ken took me on ride-alongs where he showed me how to do hospital visits and bring the presence of Jesus into the hospital. I couldn't be more blessed by a church. It has been one heck of a journey. We're talking about journeys. This sermon series is called Travel Plans. For the first part of the summer, we were talking about the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah and Jeremiah's warnings to God's people about repentance, and if you don't turn around, you're going to end up exiled to Babylon. And in the second part of the summer, we've moved to 1 Peter, some 500 years later in the New Testament. And Peter is speaking to a group of Christians on a corridor through present-day Turkey who feel like foreigners. They feel like exiles. Because of their faith, the culture has rejected them, has not allowed them to participate in the economy or politics or any societal norms, and they feel outcast. And what Peter's trying to do is lay out a map for them. A map for how to journey through turbulent times, through troubled waters, when society doesn't line up with what you believe. It's Peter's goal through this letter I get to travel quite a bit with the surf ministry. And usually it's with wheelchair athletes on our way to and from surfing competitions. And it's a riot. I was flying back from Costa Rica earlier this summer on an overnight flight. And I had gotten all my friends on earlier flights that day, and I finally got on the plane, and I had a window seat with nobody next to me. Praise God. It was an overnight flight, and shortly after we took off, the captain came on board, and he said, "This is your captain speaking. As you have probably noticed, we are going to encounter some weather this evening. We are going to do our best to avoid the thunderstorms, but we will experience turbulence. Flight attendants, please take your jump seats." Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm in stressful situations, I like to play this fun little game with myself to see just how stoic I can remain, to see how calm I can present myself, to see how unnerved I am. It's this little battle with anxiety I do. Don't judge me. You guys do it too. In fact, I'm playing this little game right now. So I opened my book, and right as soon as I opened my book, the plane seemed like it dropped 10,000 feet out of the sky. Now, it probably didn't, but the whole plane, a collective passenger gasp. And I lost the little game I was playing. And I grabbed onto the armrests, and I cinched my seatbelt up a little bit tighter, just searching for any semblance of safety. And this is what 1 Peter is writing about. 1 Peter is writing this letter to the church, and he's saying, there's going to be some tough times ahead. You're going to experience turbulence. But instead of grabbing on to something that is a symbol of safety, grab on to safety personified. Grab on to the one that is safety himself. Grab on to Jesus. He's saying, this is what's to come. But don't panic. Be prepared, but don't be surprised. This is what culture does. It's what culture did then. It's a little bit of what culture does now. And he points to Jesus, and he said, Jesus went through the storms. And with Jesus, you can go through those same storms. He promised that as we live with him, he would be with us in the midst of those storms. But we don't have to panic or live by fear, that we can know what is coming and live as he did. Now, Peter writes this book, this letter to these people, some 50 years after Jesus had lived and died and rose from the dead and returned to heaven. 50 years. So Peter is an old man. Peter's now Grandpa Pete. And I picture Peter as a guy who's a little uneducated, but wise. Wise because he had walked with Jesus and followed Jesus for some 80 years. I picture him as elderly, but not frail. Strong. If he wasn't a big man, I picture him as having big hands because Peter grew up guiding a commercial fishing vessel with wooden oars. With hands that are scarred from fishing, with hands that took nets full of fish out of the Sea of Galilee. You don't lose that kind of strength. I picture Peter as having hands that are the hands of a storyteller, not necessarily the hands of a writer. And man, Peter had 1,000 stories. Peter walked with Jesus. Peter was a huge presence in the Bible. In the Bible, Peter has more speaking parts in the New Testament than anybody besides Jesus. In the Bible, Peter's name is mentioned in the New Testament more than anybody besides Jesus. If you read the New Testament, every time they list the disciples, it says, Peter, James, and John went here. Peter, James, and John and Andrew did this. Peter, James, and John. Peter's listed first. Peter's a huge presence And he had a ton of stories. He had a ton of stories that he could have told the persecuted church in present-day Turkey to comfort them, to bring them through the troubled times that they're in, to soften the effects of the persecution. He had 1,000. He could have told them about the first time he met Jesus with his 3 other fisherman buddies, and how Jesus was so magnetic, so attractive, that it was impossible for him to say no. And Peter followed him. So did the other 3. He could have told them about the story when Peter was coming back from fishing one night and he caught nothing. And he pulled up to the shore and Jesus was preaching to multitudes. And Jesus called him on shore and said, "Peter, let me get in your boat and row out a little further so I can turn and face the crowd and preach to more." And Peter led him in his boat and guided him out a little bit over the water. And with his oars, he steadied the Messiah and had a front row seat to hear Jesus preach the Bible in a way he had never heard, to hear him talk about God in a way he had never understood, to hear him talk about the good news of the kingdom of God. And Peter got to sit there in his boat. And then Jesus said, "Let's go fishing." And Peter said, "There's no point in going fishing, Jesus. We fished all night. The fish aren't out there. The daylight has come out. If we send our nets out now, the fish will surely see." He argued with Jesus. And Jesus said, "Let's go anyways." And that morning, they caught more fish than Peter had ever caught. He had to get another boat to load up all the fish. Peter could have told the people that story, that the provision of Jesus never ends. Peter could have told them the story when Jesus followed Peter to his house to heal his mother-in-law. And he could have told the people, "Look, if Jesus could heal my mother-in-law, he can heal anybody." Peter could have told them 1,000 stories. He could have told them the story that Peter, James, and John were called by Jesus, just the 3 of them, to enter a room where a sick little girl had died. And Jairus' daughter was laying there. And Jesus calls them in, and Jesus grabs her hand and prays to the Father, "Talitha cum," little girl, arise. And Peter, James, and John got to see a little girl come back from the dead. And he could have encouraged him with that story. He could have told him, "I was there when Jesus fed 5,000 people. I carried the baskets. I had the fish and the bread that came from 2 loaves and 5 fish, or 5 loaves and 2 fish, whatever it is. I had the baskets, and people were asking, why is there still food?" And he could have said, because with Jesus, it just never ends. When we had food left over, he could have told them that story and 1,000 others. He could have told them when Jesus called Peter out of the boat in the midst of a storm and said, "Come to me and walk on water." And Peter could have said, "As long as I was looking at Jesus, I could walk on water." He could have told the persecuted church that story. He could have told them the story when Peter saw his superheroes, Elijah and Moses, with Jesus. And the voice of God from heaven said, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased." He's different than these other 2. And he would have had to tell them, "And I messed up. I said, 'Hey guys, can I build you some tents?'" He could have told them 1,000 stories. He could have told them the time he told Jesus, "Jesus, the cross is a bad idea. The rest of the stuff you were doing, that's great, but the cross, that's a bad idea. That's a bad look for a Messiah. That's a bad look for a Savior." And Jesus said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." And Peter could have told him, "But he still loved me." He could have told him the time that he denied Jesus 3 times. And Jesus still forgave him. Peter could have told the people in this letter the time when Jesus hung on a cross and Peter disappeared. and went right back to fishing. And the Savior of the world rose from the dead and chased Peter down to Galilee. Met him on a beach with a fire that was very similar to the fire that Peter had sat around and denied Jesus 3 times. And Peter sat in front of this new fire with the same smell of charcoal. And Jesus asked him 3 times, "Do you love me, Peter?" And he said, "Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do." Peter could have told any of these stories. He could have told them the story after Jesus left. And Peter, without Jesus there, prayed. And Tabitha was raised from the dead. Any of these encouraging stories to a people persecuted with no hope. But he didn't tell those stories. He didn't tell any of those stories. He told one story. He told one story in the whole letter of 1 Peter. He told the story of the cross. He told the ultimate story of suffering to a people that were suffering to encourage them. What do we make of that, church? Let's turn to 1 Peter 2, 21, 24. We're going to read from the Message this morning. The Message says this. Peter writes, "This is the kind of life you've been invited into, the kind of life Christ lived. He suffered everything that came his way so that you would know how it could be done, and also know how to do it, step by step. He never once did anything wrong, not once said anything amiss. They called him every name in the book, and he said nothing back. He suffered in silence, content to let God set things right. He used his servant body to carry our sins to the cross so we could be rid of sin, free to live the right way. His wounds became your healing." It goes on to say, "You were lost sheep with no idea who you were or where you were going. Now you're named and kept for good by the shepherd of your souls." Grandpa Pete tells one story. He tells the story of how Jesus acted and reacted on his way to the cross. He told the story about he did not seek retaliation. When they hurled insults, he made no threats. How Jesus was content to let God be the final judge. He didn't lie to get out of the predicament he was in. He didn't sin. He's saying this as an encouragement to people forced to submit to the culture at large, forced to submit to the government, forced to submit to the politic. And what he was saying was that Jesus didn't fight back against people. Jesus always fought for people with every last breath. I have this picture of Peter in my mind, and he's old. I bet Peter's not shy of his mistakes in the stories in the New Testament, but I bet he wishes he could go back and lean in a little closer. That he could follow a little bit better so he would have not made some of those missteps. But I also know that Peter knows that God has forgiven all of that, wiped it all away. This passage kind of reads like this in chaos, in culture, when things feel like they're coming down on you. Don't get more fearful. Don't get more aggressive. Don't get more defensive. And don't get more divisive. Instead, he's saying, in chaos, get closer. Peter's saying, turbulence is coming. And here's your travel plan. In chaos, get closer to Jesus. Now, we read this passage from the Message, which is a really easy translation to read. But in more precise translations, it says Jesus is our example to follow. And when it uses the word example, it's translated from the Greek word tupos. And tupos can be kind of an aggressive word. Tupos means it refers to like a tool and die or a hammer and stamp where you hammer the image into a piece of metal, and then that image is in the metal where we are the metal and Jesus is the hammer. But there's also another translation where Jesus is more like tracing paper. Like tracing his life onto ours. If you remember when your kids were little and they were learning how to write, and they would bring home the homework with the dashes and dots, and if they traced it, they could draw a perfect T. But it took time, right? It took time and repetition and making mistakes and drawing outside of the lines. And Jesus and Peter here are saying, have Jesus trace onto you his image and repeat it. And eventually, you will draw T's and S's without even thinking about it. It's a more accurate translation, I think, as we make it the priority of our lives to draw close, to allow ourselves to be traced upon by the lover of our souls. Jesus says, that's your travel plan. To live out his example. And it'll direct our thoughts, and our steps, and our tongue, and our hearts. It's in the closeness to the person of Jesus that we unlock God's purpose for our lives, especially in chaos. But the idea is that you do that before the chaos comes, while the chaos is there, and after the chaos has been removed. Peter's saying, follow his examples. I think one of the reasons, one of many, that Peter uses this story and only this story to encourage the people throughout the persecuted church is because Peter's removed from this story. Peter only wants to point to Jesus as the example. Peter knows what I know, is that many of my friends have chosen not to follow Jesus or have removed themselves from following Jesus because of this. Because they've seen an example of Jesus in someone else who has made missteps and mistakes. And they've said, if that's Jesus, then I don't want him. And Peter's saying, that's not your example. Jesus is the example. And so I wonder if Peter would want to go back and fix some of the things that he did. Peter's saying, you have freedom. You have freedom to insult and be aggressive and live life the way you want to, but you won't be following Jesus. You won't be following the example of Jesus, the wonderful, beautiful example of Jesus. In this time, 2,000 years ago, Roman culture and Greek culture are intermixed. Rome's on top, but they have this position of fear. The culture does, because their culture is based on power. And there's always a threat that if you have power, you could lose power. And so their position of fear leads them to this posture of aggressiveness and defensiveness and divisiveness. But that's not the position that Jesus had. He knew who he was, and he knew what he was here to do. And so Jesus had nothing to prove. He was just going to fight for people. Here's what we can learn from Jesus. When you live from a position of victory, you can live with a posture of humility. I'm blessed to get to pal around with all sorts of people, but a few of my buddies are like real warfighters, like special operator warfighters. They've seen it all. They've been through it all. A few of my buddies are martial artists. They'd whoop anybody in the room. But I'm always really impressed with the posture that the healthy friends that I have that are in that community, the posture that they carry themselves with. It's a posture that says, I'm not really scared of anything. It's a posture that knows that if they were to have to get in a fight, they'd win the fight. And because of that, they don't have to fight. It's an amazing posture. It's not a posture of arrogance. It's not a posture of pride. It's a posture of humility, like strong humility. How much better is it with Jesus? Jesus, the Son of God, the Lord of our lives, we can live knowing that we have nothing to fear because we already have the victory. Read the back of the book. He already won. We won. He's given us that victory. And the knowledge of who God is and who we are as we are grafted into God's family. He's given us that victory. And because of that, we can too walk humbly. In Scripture, Philippians gives us an accurate picture of this humility that Jesus had, that Jesus calls us into. Philippians 2:5-11 says this: Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life, and then died a selfless, obedient death. And the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. Because of that obedience, God lifted him high and honored him far beyond anyone or anything ever, so that all created beings in heaven and on earth, even those long ago dead and buried, will bow in worship before this Jesus Christ and call out in praise that he is the master of all, to the glorious honor of God the Father. We so often think that being humble or having humility is a sign of weakness, but no one would say that Jesus was weak. He was coming with different power. See, God thought the best way to save the world, to save me, to save you, to save our kids, to save the church, and every person who ever lived, was not to send a leader to dictate moral code, to force us to live as he would. He wasn't saying that. God wasn't saying that. He wasn't saying that we need someone who would shame or force people to live a certain way, who would yield weaponry. No. Jesus was coming with different power. More power than we could imagine. But not as the world views power. He had all the power in the universe and the power and the grace and the mercy not to use it. I see Jesus as a dangerous Savior. And here's what I mean. If he wanted to condemn you, if he wanted to shame you, if he wanted to take care of that culture that was trying to take care of him, he could have done it very easily. With all the power in the world, there would have been no way out. But if he wasn't a formidable force, there would have been no humility in his actions. There would have been no virtue in his self-control. Jesus had all of the power. His humility should make us fall to our knees in appreciation. I know that kind of sounds like I'm describing Jesus like a Marvel character, but I think that every hero story ever told is grasping at the eternal truth of who Jesus is. Those stories all point to this humble yet powerful figure. And Jesus was the epitome of that. Now, Jesus has given us that power. The power to be humble. The power to follow his example. To live from a position of victory. Already and not yet. Jesus has already given us the victory, and we haven't yet experienced it fully, but we can walk in it. And if we can walk in that, we can take on a humble position where we don't have to fight back every time. Where we don't have to act divisively or defensively. We can act as Jesus did. We can let him trace his life onto ours. We can live like he lived. We can serve like he served. We can develop relationships with those that are outcast or on the margins like he did. We can help people find and follow Jesus. The pastors in our network got together to give us all 3 practical steps to do this. 3 practical steps to live humbly. And they're not necessarily drawn out of this scripture, but they're come up by the wisdom of the pastors in our network. And the first one is to get real with God. To admit who we are and who God is. Jesus often disappeared and went off by himself to pray, to get real with his Father. To get real with God is to share our real concerns, to share our real fears, to share our prayers with our Creator. To acknowledge the way God moves and to ask him to move in ways that only he can. Get real with God. And the second practical way to live humbly is this: to get laughing early and often. To not take ourselves so seriously that we can't laugh. To actually find moments of joy in the struggle. To find moments to laugh at the suffering. Now, there is some suffering you can't laugh at, but there's a lot of suffering we can. The other night, we had a group of young adults over for dinner at our house. Young adults that kind of grew up in and around our family. We love them so much. And they're all at this stage of life. They're all 22, right? Like around that age where they're kind of graduating from college or trying to figure out what college to go to. Or they're all in this stage where they're becoming these young adults. And my wife, like she has done with this group of kids who are now young adults for 20 years, some of them. She sat them down at the dining room table, and they ate all of our food, and because they don't have any money. And they, Kelly said, "Okay, guys, it's time for our highs and lows." And back when they were teenagers, they used to groan and go, "Oh, we're going to describe the highs and lows of the day to Miss Kelly again." But now they love it. And she said, "I want everybody to share their highs and lows of becoming a young adult." And these young adults have God moving in their midst, and there's amazing stuff going on, but there's lows too, right? And they shared some heavy stuff. But one of the guys who's just graduated from nursing school, and he's waiting for his job offers to come back from the resumes he sent out, he said, it's amazing to wait and see where God's going to put me, if I'm moving to Florida or Oregon or where I'm going to go. But right now, he goes, dude, I have no money. He goes, dude, I'm serious. I am delivering food for Uber Eats just so I could put gas in my car so I can deliver more food for Uber Eats. And everybody laughed together, right? Like that's a real concern. Get laughing early and often. And the third practical step to live humbly is to get around people. Not get around people, like get people around you. Like the church is built by people. Just before this, Peter had written, you are living stones. We're formed in a way that we fit together around the cornerstone of Jesus Christ so that we can build a church. There's no church ever built by a lone stone. Get around people. Are you ready to find out which stained glass is Peter's? I'll tell you. And it comes from Scripture. Matthew 16:13, the story says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And Simon Peter was the first to answer. Simon Peter answered, he said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because you did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys to heaven. The window at the very back on that side has two keys and a cross on an emblem representing the life of Peter. If anybody needs a reminder for their pocket, there's one key sitting on the windowsill. You're free to take it. God has given him, and he has given us, the keys to heaven on this statement, on this confession of faith. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And as we put our faith in him and his sacrifice on the cross, as we allow him to be traced onto our lives, we get the keys. We get the keys to the kingdom of God. We're allowed entrance into the kingdom by following the example of Christ. And it's not based on anything else. It's not laid on the foundation of culture. It's not laid on the foundation of pride. Nobody's platform, nobody's politics, nobody's preference, save Jesus. The foundation of the church and the kingdom of heaven is built on the confession that Jesus Christ is Lord, Savior, and the Son of God. And our main point, our main mission stated at this church is to help people find and follow Jesus. We are trying to do that in the surf ministry. And we fail regularly. But we're trying to allow Jesus to be traced onto our lives and take that example to our surf community, to our beach community, to the people that live in and around the ocean shore. And we get to do a ton of fun stuff. But we do come butt up against culture sometimes. Earlier this summer, we had a great event. The Jewish Family Academy asked us to host 75 young 16, 17, or 18-year-old Israeli kids from the kibbutzes on the Gaza Strip. Their villages had all been directly affected, and they were in town to receive therapy and counseling, and they asked us if we would host them for a day at La Jolla Shores and take them surfing, and all the surf ministry partners were thrilled. So we got to have them show up in buses, and we took them surfing, showed them surf culture, played Beach Boys music, and we fed them lunch, and they asked us if we would take them out and do a paddle out in memoriam of those that they had lost in their kibbutzes. And we prayed for them. We had a wonderful day, and we sent them back to Israel. But it wasn't without coming butt up against culture. One, surf culture doesn't like it when you show up with 75 kids and you take them surfing in the ocean, because then you're taking up a valuable resource from the surfers, right? And so there's that. But there was also this undercurrent of political tension because of what had happened. And we knew it, all the volunteers knew it, and our goal was to just let them see Jesus. I want to show you a video that one of our surf ministry partners, Kanan Iuli, who's a graphic designer here at this church, he put this piece together. It's 3 minutes long. I hope it resonates with you. And then I'll come back and we'll take communion together. You could play that for us.
Sometimes I lay under the moon, I thank God I'm breathing, and I pray, don't take me soon, cause I am here for a reason. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't wanna fight no more. There'll be no more war, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day, one day, one day. It's not about win or lose, 'cause we all lose when they bleed on the souls of the innocent. Blood-drenched pavement, keep on moving though the water stay raging. In this maze, you can lose your way, In my job, you crazy, but don't let it phase you, no way, no way. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't wanna fight no more. There'll be no more war, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day, one day, one day this all will change. Treat people the same. Stop with the violence, down with the hate. One day we'll all be free and proud to be under the same sun, singing songs of freedom like one day, one day, all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't wanna fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play. One day, one day, one day, one day, one day.
Thanks for letting me show that to you. It means a lot because we're directly trying to let Jesus trace us to people that are in a culture of chaos. And we heard back from a couple of those kids that said, I thought the whole world hated us. And one of those girls that was in there is an Israeli friend of ours who has now moved back to Israel to start a surf ministry, a Jewish surf ministry in Tel Aviv. And I think it all stems from us as surfers. I mean, we're uneducated, just trying to represent Jesus. And I think that's what we're called to do in that ministry. I want to move into a time of communion where we get to worship God together. Where the whole body of believers comes together to follow Jesus' example on the last night when he was betrayed. He's having a meal, and all the food at this meal represents something to these people. And Jesus takes the bread, which represents something, and he goes, Now this bread is my body given for you. And the cup of wine, one of 4 cups of wine they had that night. He says, this wine represents my blood for your salvation. And I want you guys, whenever you gather, do this in remembrance of me. And that tradition, that example, that piece of the tracing paper is carried on for 2,000 years in the church, where we get to come together and take Jesus into our lives. That it would be more than just traced onto our lives. That Jesus himself would want to live in us and through us. And so here at Torrey Pines, we practice communion every week. And it's an open communion where you don't have to take a class or recite anything. If you have a relationship with Jesus, if you've allowed him to be traced, no matter where you are on that stage of life, this table is for you. It's Jesus wanting to live in and through you. So we're going to pray, and we're going to open the table, invite everybody to the table up front or the tables on the side. And if you're unable to make it to one of those tables, or if you'd rather sit, just raise your hand and we'll have a friend of the church, a living stone, bring you communion. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the words of Grandpa Pete. We thank you for his encouragement, as difficult it is to hear, that Jesus would have had to suffer, endure suffering, and give us an example of how to live through suffering. We thank you for it. We take it as encouragement. God, we come to the table this morning to remember that he did die for us, and not just us, for everyone. God, we thank you for his blood shed, his body given. And we receive it with thanks for us, and we receive it so that we may be examples to others, so that they might come to the table too. God, we give you the glory for this meal, and for the time of worship to be together. In Jesus' name. The table's open.